The manipulator believes they are the smartest person in the room. They think they are controlling the narrative. They think they are moving people like chess pieces. They think they are staying 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But what if their greatest deception isn't directed at others? What if the person they've fooled most completely is themselves? Eventually, every mask of a manipulator becomes a prison. Because every lie requires another lie, and the architect of deception becomes the primary victim of their own creation. Today, I'm welcoming you to explore with me the quiet collapse that happens when manipulation finally turns inward. One of the greatest misconceptions about manipulators is that it only harms the people being manipulated. In reality, deception always carries a hidden cost. Every false narrative demands maintenance. Every performance requires energy. Every distortion creates distance from reality. So, while the manipulator may appear powerful in the short term, in the long term, the consequences are often psychologically fragmentation, isolation, and even profound inability to experience authentic connection with other people. Today's reflection is not about revenge. It's not about shaming. It's not about celebrating someone else's downfall. It is simply about understanding a deeper truth. When a person builds their life around deception or manipulation, they eventually become trapped inside the very illusions they created. Many manipulators approach relationships differently than emotionally healthy individuals. Where other people see connections, manipulators see leverage. Where others see trust, manipulators see opportunity. Where others see collaboration, manipulators see strategy. Life becomes a game board for them. Manipulators look at people as pieces. Conversation becomes transactions. Relationships becomes tools. At first, this mindset can appear effective. They can get away with it. They gain influence. They create impressions. They control perceptions. They seem powerful at first, but beneath the surface, their appearance control lies a dangerous illusion. This is because genuine human connection cannot be manipulated into existence. It can only be built through authenticity. There is often a psychological reward attached to successful manipulation. What does this mean? The manipulator experiences a sense of victory, a rush, a feeling of superiority, the belief that they have outsmarted other people, Each successful deception reinforces the narrative. They would say things like, I'm smarter, I'm untouchable, I control the outcome. But this reward system creates dependency. Soon, honesty feels vulnerable. Authenticity feels risky. Control becomes addictive. They need to control the narrative. And the manipulator slowly loses their ability to engage in relationships without strategizing. What most people fail to recognize is that deception is mentally very expensive. The truth requires memory. Lies requires management. Every false story must be tracked. Every audience requires a different version. Every inconsistency creates risk. Over time, the manipulator becomes less focused on living and more focused on maintaining the narrative. Their life becomes a constant exercise in damage control. Not because the truth is attacking them, but simply because reality is difficult to suppress, especially forever. Time. Initially, manipulation feels proactive. Manipulators believe they are directing the events. They think they have control. But eventually, however, the strategy becomes defensive. Now they must protect the narrative they told. They must protect their own image. They're trying to protect the illusions they have created. They have to protect the mask they have been putting on. The entire structure becomes fragile. A single contradiction can threaten everything. And so they become increasingly anxious. They become reactive and sometimes even controlling. Not because they are gaining power, but because they are losing it. One of the most tragic consequences of chronic deception or manipulation is identity confusion. The manipulator spends so much time performing that they lose touch with who they actually are. The public image becomes stronger than the private self. The performances become more familiar than authenticity. The mask fuses to the face, and eventually they no longer know where the lie ends and reality begins. People tend to assume others operate the way they do. Authentic people assume authenticity, not lies or manipulation. Dishonest people assume dishonesty. Manipulators often become suspicious of everyone. They expect hidden motives. They anticipate betrayal. They assume deception. Why? Because they project their own internal world onto others, especially those around them. The very tactics they used against others becomes the threat they fear the most. The manipulator often becomes obsessed with appearances. They look at how things look. They worry about how they are being perceived. They worry about how they are discussed, how they are viewed by others. Optic becomes more important to them than reality. The problem is that appearances can never provide genuine peace. Because appearances require constant maintenance. Authenticity requires none of that. One of the saddest consequences of this prison is isolation. The manipulator often becomes trapped by their own image. They cannot admit it, or they fail to admit mistakes. They cannot acknowledge their struggles. They cannot reveal vulnerability, because doing so would threaten their identity, or the identity they have worked so hard to construct in their manipulation. So they suffer privately while continuing to perform publicly. Most people, unfortunately, cannot always explain it, but they can feel it. Likewise, people often sense when something is off. Even when they cannot immediately identify why, over time, relationships begin to shift. Trust begins to erode. Connections weaken. Even distance grows. The manipulator may still maintain influence at that point, but influence is not the same as trust. And eventually, the lack of trust becomes impossible to ignore. One of the most predictable outcomes of chronic manipulation is isolation. Not necessarily dramatic abandonment, but gradual withdrawal. People stop sharing. They stop investing deeply in others. People stop trusting completely. The cycle becomes smaller. Not because everyone is against them, but because authenticity naturally attracts, while manipulation naturally repels. Sometimes manipulators achieve their objectives. They may win the argument now. They may control the narrative now. They damage someone's reputation. They secure the promotion they've been fighting. They gain the advantages that they've been seeking. And then something unexpected happens. The victory feels empty because the external achievement cannot compensate for internal disconnection. A victory that is built on deception creates a strange paradox. The manipulator may gain the outcome, but they would lose the peace, interior peace. They may gain the position, but they would lose the trust. They may gain the audience, but they would lose authentic connections. My dear friends, manipulators discover that the prize that they pursue cannot provide what they actually wanted: security, belonging, peace, self-respect. One of the most empowering realization is understanding that you do not need to participate in the manipulator's reality. You do not need to defend every accusation. You do not need to correct every distortion. You do not need to expose every lie, win every battle. The manipulator's collapse is already built in the system. Time. Because deception contains the seed of its own destruction. Your energy is better spent building your life than managing their story. Let them tell their story. Focus on your character. Focus on your peace. Focus on your growth, your integrity, and your purpose. While the manipulator spends energy maintaining appearances, you invest your energy building substance. My dear friends, and substance always outlasts performance. The strongest defense against a manipulator is not counter manipulation. It is authenticity. Authenticity requires no script, no performance, no maintenance, no deceptions, but exhausting effort. The truth is remarkably efficient because it does not require constant protection. When you anchor yourself in authenticity, you become difficult to manipulate. You become difficult to confuse, difficult to intimidate, and difficult to control. Because your peace no longer depends on external narratives. So, my dear friends, remember, the manipulator begins their journey believing that they are building power. But every lie becomes another brick. Every performance becomes another wall. Every deception becomes another lock. Until one day they discover they are no longer controlling the prison they set for themselves. They are living inside it. And perhaps the greatest irony of all of this is the person most harmed by a life of manipulation is often the manipulator themselves. Not because someone defeated them, no, because karma arrived dramatically and defeated them. Because they spent so many years avoiding reality that they lost access to the very thing that makes life meaningful, authentic connections. Meanwhile, your freedom begins the moment you stop participating in the performances. Stay grounded in your truth. Stay anchored in integrity. And remember this: the strongest foundation is not built on appearances. It is built on reality. My dear friends, if this reflection resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Come back for more reflection on healing and growth.